So as I was just saying, the Padmasambhava talks a lot about shamatha and vipassana in one form or another. Those two basic forms of meditation, and he tends to go back and forth between one and the other with the ultimate goal of bringing them together as one, or what we refer to as one taste in the tradition. So the idea of merging them into one. So what we call special insight meditation, or vipassana, is the focus of this particular meditation for this week. And it's often taught as a contemplative process. The Dalai Lama often talks about it as an active form of meditation, as opposed to shamatha, which tends to be a more passive form of meditation, although there are kinds of shamatha. When you get into deity practices, that can be pretty active as a way of focusing your attention. But nevertheless, for the idea here of vipassana, special insight meditation, it is an analytical kind of meditation. There are various techniques that we can use for this process. So we're going to look at one in particular. Now we can use that same technique basically for the emptiness of self and the emptiness of other. But for this week, we're going to focus on the emptiness of self. So after we do these practices, we conclude that the self or I are merely concepts. They don't actually exist. They're labels that we assign to this idea that actually is kind of vague. It varies from moment to moment and time to time, and what it is we're really talking about when we use the term self, it is quite different from one time to another, what we're actually applying it to. And so it's interdependent upon other kinds of ideas. And when we take away all of those concepts, those ideas that we're talking about, what we're left with is nothing other than what we call suchness, or dharmakaya. There's just this thing. We can't even label it anything. So suchness becomes a convenient way of referring to it, even though suchness itself is just another label. It's a circle that we never can quite get out of, at least if we're trying to use language. So it refers to the ineffable quality of ultimate truth beyond whatever it is that we can articulate in some way. So these things are empty of inherent existence. The Buddha called emptiness, or shunyata. So the idea of vipassana is to focus on this idea of transcendent wisdom, this ultimate truth, if you will. So the goal, though, is not a cognitive understanding, as we mentioned earlier, but a direct understanding, a direct experience of this. So that's what we're trying to get at. So the vipassana of self, here we're using the Shravaka approach that we talked about earlier, and we're examining the self from several points of view. And when something is said to meet the criteria for being inherently existent, that it is existent in this way, it has to be independent of anything else. It has to be partless, that is, it cannot be subdivided, and it has to be permanent. Those three conditions have to exist in order to be inherently existent. So the idea is to use those criteria through the process of meditation on lots of different ways of looking at self to determine whether or not self really is inherently existent. And then in the process we will discover most likely that it is not, and for this purpose we use the 5 skandhas as we described previously as a part of this. Now you can alternate in this process. You can do one of the different skandhas each day and kind of rotate through the skandhas, or you can do all 5 of them every day, depending on what works best for you in this process. So again, with this meditation, we begin by setting our intention. What is it that we hope to accomplish in this particular meditation that we are doing? Having a goal is very helpful to the practice, as we saw earlier. And then we take refuge. and then we actually do the meditation. So as we started out in the stillness of body, speech, and mind, we begin by doing that kind of a process, to settle the body, speech, and mind into a natural state. And then we began thinking about the idea of self. First, looking at the self as a whole. What is the self, or I? Where is it located? What shape is it? Where did it come from? Where does it go? And then we continue that process by looking at each of the 5 skandhas. Is our body the self? Is any part of the body self? Is the body or any part of it independent of anything else? For example, food, clothing, shelter. How about parts of the body? The fingers, the hands, the arms, the legs, and so forth. Or are the internal parts, the heart, the lungs, the stomach? Any of those parts? And then we continue examining the parts in terms of relationships until you gain complete confidence that, in fact, the body and these parts are not self. Then we go through the same kind of a process with feelings. Is the feeling of love self? Is the feeling of anger self? Are there any other feelings that are self? We go through each of these until we experience them one at a time. Are they independent of anything else? Or is there a cause that might be triggering that particular feeling? Where does it go? Until we again gain confidence, the absolute confidence that in fact the feelings are not absolutely, truly existent. And then perceptions. What is the nature of the things we see, hear, smell, taste, touch? And our perceptions, not the objects themselves out there, but the perception, the image of something or the sound of something, which occur in our mind, right? Not the things out there, but what we think we see is out there, but is actually in our mind. Are those perceptions self? Do any of them make up self? Are they dependent upon other objects? Objects being perceived. Are they the perceptions that are permanent, or do they dissolve? Do they come and go? And so we continue doing that until we gain confidence and understanding that perceptions are not self. Then we look at mental constructions or thoughts. Are your thoughts self? Are thoughts independent of anything else? For example, your brain. Can you think thoughts without your brain? Okay. Are there any other sources that trigger thoughts? For example, your perceptions. Are your thoughts permanent, or do they dissolve, disappear? And again, we continue with this process until we gain confidence that, in fact, perceptions or mental constructions, are not self. And finally, the nature of consciousness or consciousnesses as we go through that process. How long does a consciousness last? Our awareness of something. How long does it last? Is it constant or does it change? Can your awareness be broken into smaller pieces? How small? Is there ever any finite piece which cannot be further subdivided? We continue examining those until again we exhaust all of the possibilities and gain confidence in an understanding of consciousness is not so. And then once we've exhausted all those possibilities, here's the real key. We let go of all of it and we just rest in that understanding and the direct experience of that. We let go of the ideas, the thoughts, everything, and so then we get that direct experience of having done that. So the more time you have, the more things you can go through, the more often you can do that during the day, the more you habituate yourself to being able to have that direct experience. In just a minute. Okay? And then we conclude by dedicating the merit And as Padmasambhava says in the post-dedication or meditation here, we look for opportunities to continue to reflect on those things throughout the day, okay? As well as being mindful about all of the things that we think, say, and do during the day as well. So that's the meditation practice for this next week.